Welcome to my American History Notes, where I discuss my conclusions I've drawn from studying American history, some of which you might not agree with. In fact, you might not agree with any of them, but you should at least have an opinion and know about these things. Look at primary sources, read the documents, original documents. It's very important that you have an idea that you just didn't get from somebody else, maybe a right or left wing demagogue you hear on the radio or you read and you say, they told me this and this is what it is. Well, it may not be the case. So you need to study and learn for yourself. And primary sources include laws, letters, journals, statements by people, direct statements by people. So very, very important. Anyway, let's begin so I can get through some things here I want to talk about. Um, Most revolutions don't end up in a free and democratic government. It's one thing to overthrow an existing government, and another entirely to create a government afterwards that's not a dictatorship run by either one or many tyrants. The fact that America's revolution ended with the formation of a republic run by many of the same men who uh, who fought for its liberty is unusual in history. But America's revolution was a conservative one, not in any way like France's or Russia's later period of upheaval. And is a top-down one where the leadership got involved, um, rather opposed to the masses first. Americans were fighting to keep something they cherished, the liberty they enjoyed. As the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson later said, quote, "We began with freedom." Then they believed that political institutions were important as safeguards to liberty. Thomas Jefferson had said that if a bad government were instituted, it would have been better to keep the bad one they had. John Dickinson said, and I quote, "Experience must be our only guide, reason may mislead us." The men we call today our quote, "founding fathers" were intent upon building on what they had and not creating something new like the French and the Russians later would attempt. Most of the Americans who wrote state and federal constitutions were college educated men who had studied Aristotle, Plato, Cicero, and Polybius, as well as other ancient writers, and had thought a great deal about political reconstruction. George Mason and Thomas Jefferson, John Adams and James Madison knew exactly what they were doing. Everyone assumed that the new states would need constitutions to define and limit the powers of government. Liberty wasn't a vague term to those men with the fuzzy overtones of the welfare and warfare society of today's America. To the Americans of 1776, liberty was first freedom under the laws of their own making, and secondly, the right to do anything that didn't harm someone else. Essentially, the rule of law, not the whims of one man or oligarchy ruling despotically over society, were what was expected and prized. The contradiction in all of these things is the existence of slavery, which we'll continue to discuss as time goes by. Um, One of the sayings of John Locke, with whom all literate Americans were familiar, was, "Wherever law ends, tyranny begins." And you should read his to the two treatises of government. It's a fascinating reading if you can get past the 17th century lettering in an original copy. So every state's constitution included a Bill of Rights. The first, Virginia's, written by George Mason, was adopted on June 12, 1776. The Virginia Declaration of Rights is one of the great liberty documents of all time. The Virginia Declaration starts off by claiming that all men are born with certain inherent rights which they don't give up by entering into society. Of course, that initially only meant white men. And it wasn't until much later that it began to be extended. And we're still, like I say, America is a work in progress. Some of its statements came, but it's important. These things are very important concepts, and that will guide us in freedom for all. Some of its statements came under the Magna Carta, came from the Magna Carta. The petition acknowledged by Prince John to his nobles in 1215 in medieval England, the right to a jury trial and the right not to lose one's freedom except by law and by the judgment of one's peers. Other clauses came from the Petition of Rights, which confronted Charles I of England in 1628, that a man can't be compelled to give evidence against himself, that standing armies in peacetime were a threat to liberty, and that in all cases the military should be under the strict control of the civil authority. Others were developments that had only been hinted at previously, such as freedom of the press and freedom of religion. Freedom of the press is sometimes more of a problem than a good thing, as Mark Twain later said, quote, "If you don't read the newspapers, you are uninformed, and if you do read them, you are misinformed," unquote. Freedom of religion breaks up when the religion afforded freedom doesn't believe that anyone else should be free to practice their own religion. So religions that can be classified as political in nature, such as Roman Catholicism or Islam, can eventually lead to a dissolution of that great exercise in freedom of conscience. And we're going to talk about other rights and James Madison, and we have some things to discuss in detail. So there'll be several sessions on Confederation and Constitution. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you'll study this and think about what you believe and what you've found, and draw conclusions of your own. Bye.